Hello, good afternoon, and welcome back to the cruel, brutal and heartless capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. Look at all the oppressed proletariat behind me in their iron coffins, driving home from work. Yes, and don't you think capitalist architecture is just so fucking ugly? Good God. Of all the epochs in human history, capitalist architecture has got to be the most dull, soulless and hideous form of architecture. Yes, and there's a reason for that. So today my 4 o'clock student is not around. She's on leave, and so I have about an hour and a half to talk to you. And that is why today I'm going to talk to you about the rising tide of fascism in Malaysia and how we can address this problem as a society. But it's going to have to force us to grapple with some very, very uncomfortable truths. And it's going to have to force us to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Let's go. Nightclub, a hive of scum and villainy. Later on, after the revolution, we're going to turn these places into re-education centers. Yes, we're going to repurpose every single bar and nightclub and turn it into a re-education center for class enemies. You know, since they love those places so much, they can spend 24 hours in those places. So you might have heard recently about this Arabian social media influencer who went to Batu Caves, which is a traditional Hindu temple in Malaysia. It's a temple in a cave, and that jackass decided to start mocking the Hindu religion on camera for views. And not only that, even more disheartening was the fact that there were many Malaysians in agreement with that man. Many Malaysians who supported this uncivilized and improper behavior of that man. For the record, I think mocking anyone's religion, no matter what religion that is, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Mormonism, actually probably Mormonism is probably the only religion you can mock, is uncivilized and improper behavior. But what was very disheartening was seeing many, many Malaysians supporting this man. But this was just a symptom of a larger social problem in Malaysia, because any Malaysian could tell you that despite the tenuous peace that we enjoy ever since the racial riots of May 13, 1969, Malaysian society's stability has always existed on a house of cards, because at any moment this stability could essentially be toppled if someone were to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. We're still on very shaky ground when it comes to the stability of our country. That's why I have no tolerance for people who practice race baiting or for people who to mock other people's cultures, even if no matter who those people might be. Because we have not yet created a unified national Malaysian identity that everyone can agree on. And no one can deny that there has been a rising undercurrent of fascism in recent years. And I don't mean to point out at any particular race or religion, because dark forces exist in every single racial community. Of course, it is expected that the liberals in Malaysia will immediately, as soon as you say that there's fascism in Malaysia, will immediately point at the Malay community and say that, it is because of the Malay mindset that fascism can fester in Malaysia. But I disagree with this take. I don't agree with it, because dark forces exist in just about every single ethnic community in this country. Let's not pretend that only ultras of one particular race exist. There are ultras in just about every single race. Yes, of course, there are right-wing ultra-nationalistic Malays who don't like me because I'm Chinese. But at the same time, there are also right-wing ultra-zealous Chinese ultras in this country, as I have shown you before, who don't like me because I'm perceived to be a race traitor banana as well. Because I don't really care whether vernacular schools survive the 21st century. I don't speak any Chinese. And no, I'm not particularly fussed on whether my children grow up to be culturally Chinese or not, as long as they grow up to be decent people and don't end up becoming reactionaries. Yes, doesn't really matter to me. But at the same time, you have two camps of ultras in this country. One camp of ultras calls me a filthy communist dog, and another camp of ultras calls me a filthy race traitor banana. So there's no denying it. Malaysia has an undercurrent of fascism, and these dark forces exist in every single community. The two great camps of Malaysian fascists are split into two, and those would be the Ketuanan Melayu, or Malay supremacy defenders, who believe that the Malays are the true owners of this land. The bourgeois Malays, that is, not the working class Malays. They are fundamentally ethno-nationalist reactionaries who operate in the same way as Zionists, who think in the same way as Zionists, in the sense that, a piece of land ought to be granted to someone, not on the basis of shared history, but rather on the basis of DNA. So they like to use the term pendatang, which means, how do we say, foreigner. But foreigner is not even a strong enough word. That word is used on the Chinese and the Indians. Basically, the ethno-nationalist in Malaysia is fundamentally a Southeast Asian Zionist who believes that the land, or the owners of the land, are the ruling class Malays. That's one type of fascist. And on the other hand, you have the opposing end of the spectrum, which is the Chinese ultra, the vernacular Chinese ultra fascist. Now, that type of fascist is perhaps not as dangerous as the Ketuanan Melayu fascists, but also quite problematic in their own respect. Because not only do they basically regard all Chinese people who don't conform to their notion of Chineseness as being a filthy race traitor, but they also have this supremacy complex, in the sense that they do believe that East Asians are superior to Southeast Asians. And they don't want to work with reasonable Malays in order to settle this problem. And so you have two great camps of fascists, two politically powerful camps of fascists in this country who are duking it out for supremacy. And fundamentally, the point that the Malay ethno-nationalist wants to make is that this land belongs to us. It's very similar to how the Zionist thinks. This land belongs to us, and you ethnic minorities, just like the Zionists will say, you Palestinians ought to be grateful that we allow you to stay. Even though the Sultan of Malaya, the Sultans actually invited the Chinese over to develop their industry. Anyway, they have this notion that, the land of Malaysia belongs primarily to the Malays. And fundamentally, the Chinese and Indians are basically an unwanted inconvenience that they have to put up with. And it's very, very clear to me that these people may consider themselves to be culturally Malay or culturally Asian, but they have imbibed the ugly British colonial mentality of xenophobia and hatred for Chinese and Indian people, which is not historical in the Malay zeitgeist throughout history. That mentality of disliking Indians and Chinese is a very Western mentality. Even the concept of ethno-states itself is a very, very Western 19th century mentality. And likewise, the concept of race realism that you see these Chinese ultras practice, and this concept of race essentialism that you have to be a certain way if you're a certain race. So if you're Chinese and you don't conform to our idea of Chineseness, you are a filthy disgrace and you're lower than garbage in our eyes. This is also a very Western, Saxonized way of thinking. So both these ultras really are two sides of the same coin. They hate to think of it that way, but it's true. They have a very Westernized, Saxonized view of the world. One group of ultras thinks about a nation not as people of various cultural and religious backgrounds, but rather in terms of blood and soil. Like to be part of the Malaysian nation, the true part of the Malaysian nation, you have to have a certain blood quota. And the other type of reactionary, also has a Darwinian view of the world. The Chinese ultra-reactionary fundamentally wants the Singapore model in Malaysia, which is a rugged, individualist, hyper-competitive model that basically places priority on Mandarin-speaking Chinese people. That's the Singapore model. So, yes, I know Lee Kuan Yew starved the vernacular schools of enrollment, but still, there's no doubt about it. In Singapore, it is a society that prioritizes a certain group. It's just that they're much better at hiding their racism than we are, okay? But the tragedy of May 13 was not only instigated by very, very insidious reactionaries who wanted to divide our country, but it was also instigated by these types of racial ultras who would kill to prove a point. Yes, the fact of the matter is that there is a trend of fascism in this country, and I'm going to tell you why that is. It's because Malaysians have not yet developed the ability to think critically of issues, and Malaysians fundamentally have not been subjected, or rather have not been granted, a holistic humanities education at school. And this is why, because of our lack of critical thinking, our lack of respect towards the humanities subjects, this is what the result is. There's no doubt that we're quite technologically advanced. We're not a backwater village. Malaysia's forces of production are quite well developed, relatively, compared to many other Southeast Asian countries. But our mentality, not in all of us, but in many of us, is still a savage Saxon mentality. That was no doubt not our fault in some ways, because it was passed to us by the British. We learned how to be brutal and cruel from the colonizer. In the same way, the African Americans learned how to be brutal and cruel from the slave master. They didn't have such a thing as prison culture or gangster rap culture in their tribes in Africa. We picked up the ugly characteristics of the colonizer. But at the same time, we also developed our forces of production because of this lack of respect towards the humanities. And that was another aspect of Victorian utilitarianism that led to us being in this predicament in the first place. There's the old trope of the arts and humanities graduate, the person who studies English literature in school and college and is not able to find a job after that. And certainly many people seem to subscribe to this old trope, the notion that the only secure pathways are things such as business studies, accounting, or anything within the STEM realm. But the reality is that in Malaysia, we have a paucity of competent arts graduates, and we have an overabundance of business and STEM graduates. So much that you can even see business and STEM graduates getting jobs that are totally unrelated to their field, because there's simply too many of them going around the market, simply because those degrees are more popular than arts degrees, simply because of our cultural attitude that we inherited from the Brits, that arts degrees are not that important, and if you want to make a decent living, you do business or STEM or accounting or something like that. The reality of the matter is that I've never been short on employment. Don't even bother asking me for English lessons at this moment, because I don't mean to be rude, but I simply have too many students and no slots to spare. But the reality is that in Malaysia, there is a paucity of competent humanities graduates because of our appalling disregard for the humanities that have led us to this predicament in the first place. When I say Malaysia is a brutal capitalist dystopia, when I say Kuala Lumpur is a brutal capitalist dystopia, I'm being facetious, but at the same time I'm not being facetious. Do you know what I mean? I'm trying to add wry humor to a very bad situation. And this bad situation can potentially be deadly if we don't nip it in the bud right now. Well, as you know, those of you who subscribe to the Marxist school of thought, the popular ideas of any epoch are the popular ideas of the ruling class. So the popular idea under capitalism is that if something is not utilitarian, that is to say, if something does not help the capitalists to increase their surplus value, it is worthless. So that's why arts and humanities under this current epoch are highly, highly disrespected. Because in the previous epoch, people forget that even people like Adam Smith, for example, was an arts and humanities graduate. He was a teacher of moral studies at the University of Oxford. He wasn't even an economist, so to speak. The attitude, you could describe it as is Victorian utilitarianism. And you could describe people who have a disdainful attitude to the arts and humanities because they don't earn you money as a sort of a Gradgrind. You know, Thomas Gradgrind from the Charles Dickens novel Hard Times. I made a video a couple of years ago, I think, entitled Hard Times was a Cautionary Tale. But of course, not many people deigned to actually watch it, even though it was such an important video warning about the consequences of neglecting the humanities. Because when you neglect the humanities and you focus on the development of machines and you focus on fundamentally creating a cold and calculating type of society, you end up essentially veering society towards a reptilian sort of zeitgeist. You ever wonder why Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, despite being some of the most technologically advanced societies at their time, had horrible, horrible human rights track records? Because these societies did not put a premium on the humanities subjects. These societies built machines of mass destruction, weapons of mass killing, but they did not have any deep spiritual connection with the earth. They did not have any deep understanding of the humanities, and fundamentally they were technocratic societies which were fundamentally focused on results and cold, hard fact and cold, hard results over ethics or empathy. The atomic bomb that was developed by Robert Oppenheimer, how many people did it kill? Thousands of people. Oppenheimer was a brilliant man who developed that nuclear bomb, which killed thousands of innocent people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Oppenheimer gave the green light to use that bomb. Because Oppenheimer, fundamentally, brilliant a scientist as he was, did not see people as people, because Oppenheimer was fundamentally a man who viewed the world through a technical, machine-like lens. And fascists hate the humanities. They hate the art subjects because the humanities fundamentally teach you to question. They teach you to question the world around you and to question authority. And this is why Hitler, when he took power, ended up seizing copies and copies of Karl Marx's work, because it is true that Hitler hated Jews, but the Jew that Hitler hated most was Professor Karl Marx, the number one humanities man, who he saw as a threat to his power. Because if people start to learn humanities, they start to learn critical thinking, they will start to question the ruling class. And because of that, and that the fascists cannot have that, because fascists want blind obedience and loyalty to the state and loyalty to the in-group. So that is partly why fascists do not like the humanities. And the reason why you don't see all that many Malaysians who are willing to question the status quo or to question ridiculous notions such as, supremacy of any race, or the idea that people ought to have race loyalty to any particular race, is because they have not been taught to question. The Malaysian education system itself is set up to produce mindless drones. It is set up to produce conformist drones who will serve capital and serve the reactionaries. Because even the art stream students do not really get to study true humanities subjects. Let me give you an example of what art stream students study. They study English, accounting, mathematics, commerce, economics, what else? Kemahiran hidup, which means life skills, knowing how to saw a table, and how to survive in the outside world. And what else do they learn? They may learn literature. That's optional. You see what I'm getting at. How come we don't have subjects like social sciences in school? How come we don't have real humanities subjects like social sciences, or real humanities subjects like critical thinking? Why is it that every single humanities subject, except for literature, in the Malaysian education system seems to be designed to reproduce the interests of the ruling class? Even history, which is supposed to be a soft subject, can be manipulated to serve the ruling class as well. You don't really get any subjects that encourage students to think out of the box and encourage students to be critical thinkers and creative thinkers, simply because those subjects are not given any respect in this society. And I believe that society's attitudes towards those subjects, like the creative subjects or the critical thinking subjects like social sciences, is in fact the byproduct of a very much more nefarious scheme. The scheme to keep the masses ignorant, coddled, and unaware of the fact that they live in a matrix. Now, this is by no means meant to insult anyone who is in the business or STEM fields. I don't mean to belittle anyone who comes from those fields. But have you ever asked yourself, why is it that art students are expected to study mathematics and accounting and other hard subjects, while science students in Malaysia are not expected to study literature or to study humanities-related subjects, unless you're talking about moral studies. But even then, moral studies is basically just a cut and paste subject in which you memorize certain moral values and regurgitate them in the exam to get your A. It's a free A for most of us. It's because our society, our education system is geared towards producing people who think in a non-artistic way, in a non-humanistic way, who think in a cold, business-like, machine-like way. And what is the result of it? Cold, machine-like people. That is the result of it. So it's high time that Malaysia begins to acknowledge the elephant in the room. The lack of respect towards the humanities and the resulting inability of our people to settle disputes peacefully. The inability of our people to think critically and to be able to sort communal disputes in a dialectical manner. This inability has resulted from the fact that our people have been so deprived of a holistic humanities education. And this is the end result of it. And the reason the people are deprived of a humanities education is so that we don't question the ruling class. We don't question the powers that be. It doesn't do good for them to have people who are too uppity, who don't know their place. So what I'm trying to say is that the lack of a humanities education, the lack of a proper holistic humanities education, and the stifling of people who question. You know, you're not allowed to ever question the status quo. You're not allowed to even read any of Karl Marx's books. You're not allowed to, well, you can, but you're not allowed to teach it. And you're of course not allowed to question any rules in this country, or you're not allowed to basically disagree with the way the reactionaries run this country. It has created a society that is basically a powder keg just waiting to explode. Why do you think Malaysians shy away from controversial topics, especially topics that might upset people, topics that touch on things like, politics or race or religion? Why do you think most Malaysians would rather keep their head low and focus on less controversial things like shopping or food, and would rather simply go to work, come home, go to sleep, and then go to work the next day again, keep their head low and hope not to get fired? The only people really who are discussing these things openly are the fascists, who, are not exactly my cup of tea either. But the reality is that Malaysians are fearful of discussing controversial topics because Malaysians have not been trained to discuss controversial topics in an intellectual and dialectical manner. It's not in the best interest of our ruling class for that to happen. And that is why I say Malaysian society is a powder keg waiting to explode, because our people are not trained to disagree respectfully, which is what the humanities is supposed to train you to do, and to express a point of view respectfully, and to basically come to a compromise between two parties where both sides can benefit. No, Malaysians have not been taught that. Malaysians have been taught to keep their head low, obey orders, and fundamentally it is our education system that has led to this problem in the first place. So what I'm saying is we do not need more STEM. I'm not belittling STEM or business. But we do not need more funding for STEM and business. What is imperative right now for Malaysia, what is really, really imperative, is funding for humanities-based subjects. Subjects that will equip Malaysians with the knowledge and critical thinking skills that will make them both an informed, deep-thinking citizenry. who will be able to settle communal disputes dialectically, intellectually, and respectfully, using their akal or their intellect rather than their brawn. So that is why I'm saying a holistic humanities-based education or a holistic humanities-based program is sorely needed in this country. I'm not saying that everybody has to become a humanities graduate. I'm not saying that all the streams have to be converted to art streams. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying is that the STEM lords and the business lords need to, or what they need to do is they need to just let go of their arrogance towards the arts graduates, towards the art students for a moment and actually listen to us. Because you might be able to produce fancy machines. You might be able to produce wonderful, delightful architecture like this. But of course you don't produce a good enough aircon in this mall. That's why I'm sweating like crazy. But at the same time, there are some things that you cannot do that we can. And solving racial tensions, solving racial riots, solving communal riots, and bringing about peace in this country, I don't think is something you people are equipped to do. And we humanities graduates, we humanities people are the best people for this job. So thank you for producing our running water, our electricity, and our buildings. But frankly, to all you STEM lords, just lower your ego for a bit, for a moment, and listen when we humanities people actually say we have a proposal. When we humanities people actually put forward a proposal on how you can improve the situation in this country. Okay? But I'd like to end this video by saying that besides the fact that we should also not only reform Malaysian education from the ground up, what needs to be done also is to basically reshuffle the priorities of our society. Do we focus on short-term interests like producing beautiful buildings and beautiful skyscrapers at the expense of the environment? Or do we think perhaps we can put off gratification for the moment and think about the society and the environment around us? Because we don't live alone. We are all members of one body and we're all responsible for each other. And we humanities students, we humanities graduates understand that very well, that the world isn't all machines and biological organisms. That the world is comprised of people with souls. But the thing is, every art student is expected to learn accounting or mathematics, aren't they? Even though accounting and mathematics may not be part of their future job. They may, for example, be an English teacher like myself. So why shouldn't science students be made to learn humanities subjects like literature or social sciences as well? Why is it that only art students are expected to learn hard subjects, but science students are not expected to learn soft subjects? So I think that science students should also be required to take on a soft subject as part of their SPM, which is basically a subject like literature or humanities or you know, critical thinking or something. It would not only humble the STEM lords, but it would also make them realize that, you know, humanities isn't just worthless drivel. You know, it's true that machines can help to ensure your survival, Science and technology can help to ensure your survival, but it is humanities that give value to survival. A world without the humanities would be a cold, drab, colorless, and depressing one. And I don't want to live in that world. And I'm sure neither do you. So treat your humanities friends with more respect. You know? Instead of just taking your humanities friends for granted. Instead of just, treating your humanities friends as a weird oddball who chose an esoteric career, understand that without your humanities friends, you would have no movies, music, paintings, or soft culture to speak of. Yeah? And like I say, solving the issue of fascism in this country, bringing about peace in Malaysia, is not something that the business or STEM people, I'm sorry to say, are prepared to solve. I don't think that the business or STEM subjects will help us to bring peace to this country. Because the only thing, in my opinion, that can actually bring lasting peace and curb reactionary fascist instincts is a humanities education and a liberation of the mind to think critically and to think and the liberation of people to think for themselves. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.